apologies. Uh, Apologies for that. This was a overdue um topic I wanted to do, but it makes sense now since there's been an update with California coming down on Glocks, and now they have like decided to dump and redesign like I think 90% of their products. So they're getting rid of almost all of them because they're facing several lawsuits, and it doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't make sense that they're facing lawsuits for their firearms that people are illegally modifying, which makes them more dangerous. But if they're illegally modifying it, I don't see how that should be the fault of Glock, the company itself. That doesn't make sense to me. Um, and then of course, we've had some fatal shootings like Charlie Kirk and some other stuff. So it brings all of this to the fore, right? I I didn't think that California would have that much pull on an international company, international arms um, company that they could face lawsuits from California and other places that would pretty much get its whole product line shut down, like 90% of it, I believe. Could be 80%, but 80% is still the majority. But from what I gather, is 90%. 90% of the of their guns, firearms, whatever, need to um, need to be redesigned so that they can't be illegally modified. That's bananas. I might have to pull up some information here on my PC just in case things get technical. But no one's even in the chat room right now, so it doesn't really matter. Or does it? We'll see, because I'll see how long it takes for people to gravitate into the live stream if they do, because it is Friday evening, so you know I'm aware that some people may have chosen something else to do instead. Eh, that's always that's always a possibility. If so, I definitely won't belabor the point and stay on and just talk with myself, because I do want some interaction to speak on this topic. One, it would just be more exciting to have interaction um, on the topic. And I'm not an expert on this stuff, although there are some things on which I do have some thoughts. Uh, but I'm sure a lot of people have thoughts on it as well, as far as gun rights versus gun control. And my position is so nuanced, I can't say I really fall on either side. I, well, no, well, if like if I if I were if I had to take it to the wall, I would probably come down more on the gun right side, to be honest. But it's just simply not that easy. It's not that simple for me because there's just so much. mishmash between them. It's sort of like the whole false dilemma between pro life and pro choice. Like I find that a false dilemma. This is a similar issue. I find gun rights versus gun control sort of a false dilemma. You can be both, although you're probably going to be a little bit more of one than the other. And I think that's similar to the issue of pro life versus pro choice. I think most people are somewhat in the middle and then gravitate a little bit more to one side or the other based on either their politics or personal experience or trying to actually reason it out. Um, but again, in a similar vein, when it comes to weapons, and again, for people who are going to watch this on replay, I don't have any weapons to display. So you came here for that. No, that's not, that won't happen. But I do want to discuss, like I said, gun rights versus gun control. Like I said, I'm a bit on both sides. Um, I'm an advocate for owning and using firearms for self defense, as well as, you know, for sporting use, or even if people want to just collect them. I don't really have a problem with that. Um, I do, as a collector, I I don't. How do I want to put this? As a collector, there's always this fine line between, are you just doing too much? And but as a collector, my collectibles tend to be books, toys, comics, and uh, Asian knickknacks, East Asian knickknacks. Those are sort of things I collect, um, and other or 80s vintage things. But for collectors who are collectors of firearms, which is an expensive hobby to have, by the way. Uh, on one hand, like I said, as a someone who finds themselves in the collector space, I can see why someone would want to have so many of these weapons. However, there's another side of me that finds it kind of cringe that someone can legally own a stockpile of weapons, of firearms. So I get that from both sides, and I don't know where I fall on that. It would probably be like on a case to case basis. Like if I think this is a responsible person, like they're law enforcement or former law enforcement and former, prior military, don't have mental health problems, don't have a violent a violent criminal history. I don't have too much of a problem with it, but it's still, I looking at it from the perspective of a person who wouldn't have weapons. I could see how they would find that how they could find it uncomfortable with someone owning a stockpile of weapons, even if they own them completely legally. However, most, again, like a collector, most people who buy these weapons as collectibles probably aren't going to fire most of them. They probably have just a few of their weapons that they actually practice with at the range. or doing dry uh, dry fire shooting, stuff like that. Whereas the rest of them just remain collectibles, behind a case or something. Mm, yeah. So I get that. Uh, with gun control, um, when it comes to gun control, it becomes messy because then the problem with gun control versus gun rights is just like the problem with pro life. Well, I mean, with pro choice versus pro life is that it becomes instantly a left versus right thing, even though most people in America are moderates, and so their positions tend to be more moderate on these things as well. But often political tribes will push them into one side or another, and it becomes, and then if you strongly identify with a political party, it's like you almost have to go with how they view these issues. So it's like, oh, pro life, oh, he must be Republican or conservative. Oh, gun rights, he must be pro life. I mean, he must be Republican or conservative, and vice versa. You know, oh, he's pro choice, he must be Democratic or liberal. Gun control, he must be Democratic or liberal, and it's just not really the case. And especially when it comes, this is what made me become a political independent, is when I see people shun good science research just based on their political leanings. And to be clear, both sides do this because people always try to say that Republicans are anti-science. They're only anti-science on the things that push their buttons. But Democrats, liberals, progressives, they're just as anti-science on the things that push their buttons as well. And this is why I'm an independent, and I became politically apathetic over the past 12 years, is that neither side has a license on being more scientifically grounded than the other. Like I said, both are anti-science on certain hot button items, but Democrats try to pretend because, well, it is a fact that there are probably more people who have gone on to higher education on the Democratic side. So yeah, that is an apparent fact. However, that does not mean that they are more science literate than those on the right. And it doesn't mean that they're more accepting of science than those on the right. It's just that the things that they are pro science about stands out more. But they are quite anti science on a lot of things. And that has increased over the past 10 years with, the issues of things like gender ideology and stuff like that. We've seen the left become quite anti-science towards um, reproductive biology and and evolutionary biology. The left used to be all about pro pro evolution, but they're not anymore. Plus, there were elements of evolution they never liked. They didn't like evolutionary psychology. They were uncomfortable with that. They were uncomfortable with they were generally uncomfortable with the human sciences because the human sciences reveal a a a quite a a a a big fact that they wish to deny, which is that human nature is governed by the laws of science. But on the left, they don't want to admit that because they have this whole bias towards a tabula rasa, or the blank slate, that people basically, you know, a better society can be socially engineered, and the human sciences contradict that belief. So generally, people on the left are against the human sciences, and particularly against evolutionary psychology, sociobiology, um, biotechnology, um, behavioral neuroscience, stuff like that. And but I'll be fair, both the left and the right hate human science. Both the left and the right hate the human sciences, just for different reasons. But both the left and the right do hate. So I'll be fair, both the left and the right hate human sciences. They just hate them for different reasons. The left hates the human sciences because it contradicts their efforts in social engineering. The right hates human sciences because it contradicts a certain uh, Christian Judeo-Christian ideology of humanity. And like I said, because both sides are anti-science, this is what led me to be a political independent way back in like 2006, 2008. And I've grown apathetic towards politics since 2013. Uh, Although I talk about it a lot, I'm still apathetic towards politics. I consider myself. This is why when asked, I say I consider myself a classical liberal in the veins of the European Enlightenment thinkers. So people like was Adam Walsh who wrote The Wealth of Nations. I'm pretty sure I got his name wrong, but the author of The Wealth of Nations, Adam Walsh, who was, I think, friends with David Hume, another important Enlightenment thinker and philosopher, um, and a bunch of others. So yeah, that's what I point to when people want to pinpoint my politics. Is people usually think I'm conservative, or they think I'm liberal, depending on the topic. What's up, Carlton? What's going on, brother? But like I said, even though this topic was overdue, I was saying this before you came in, Carlton. Like, even though this topic is overdue, I think it works even more now because of what happened with the Glock company pretty much having its whole product line shut down through lawsuits in California. So I'm gonna get back to that, but I was just saying generally that I believe both sides are anti-scientific on there's certain pet ideas. Bake some salmon. That sounds pretty good, bro. What yeah? What do you got? What are you pairing it with? Got to be like some potatoes or something, like potatoes or rice too. You can't fail with rice, but I don't know. For some reason, I was thinking baked potatoes because you said baked salmon, so I was like, mm, maybe some baked potatoes. I would like fried potatoes with it. I actually have a secret. This is completely this is completely tangential, but yeah, I the my family. I almost said my family name. Oops. Uh, my family. I think starting with my grandfather. Although I wish if he were still alive, I would have asked him who taught him. But starting with my grandfather and my father, and down to me, and I'm gonna have to teach my son. we have a secret country fried potatoes um, that only we know how to fix. I believe only we know how to fix. My mom fixes a species of it, but it's not like ours. She doesn't use our secret ingredient, which is I can I'll at least I'll give you a secret ingredient, but I can't tell you what it is. I can't tell you the whole recipe. Uh, we use Old Bay seasoning in our country fried potatoes. It's delicious. I have not fixed it for my wife yet. I told her as soon as possible I will fix her some the my because I have to. I will fix her the secret recipe my father taught me for our country fried potatoes. We should probably trademark it. We'll see. But it's a family recipe. But rice and pepper sounds good though too. Yeah, right. Rice and peppers that won't rice and peppers doesn't fail. um, but yeah, where was I? So yeah, so I was saying basically in a roundabout way about the whole gun control versus gun rights. I find to be a false dilemma based on political identities because like I said, if you strongly identify with one or either of the two main political parties, it's almost like you have to fall down on the issue based on that party's stance on it. So, Republican Party comes down solidly on gun control. Democrats fall solidly on. I'm sorry, did I say that wrong? Republicans fall down solidly on guns rights. Democrats fall solidly down on gun control. And I just think it's a false dilemma, just like the false dilemma between pro life and pro choice. And like I said, this is one of the motivations for me to be a political independent is that I don't have to form my opinions on these issues based on which party or which political ideology in which I fall. Instead, I can look at it I can look at it based on what is the best argument. And like I said, I'm somewhere in the middle with both gun control and gun rights. However, like I said, if I was pushed to like choose one or the other, and I feel no need to be pushed in one direction or another. But if and only if I would probably fall more on gun rights than gun control. We often see, and this is a point that conservatives have made, that you often see gun control pushed um, authoritarian in nations with authoritarian governments, right? However, we've also seen nations becoming incredibly safer through gun control, although their gun control tends to be quick. Although in doing so, that their gun control measures are usually pretty extreme, right? Um, and then what like the reason why I don't just say I'm just gun rights is because I dislike some of the fallacious arguments used against gun control. Just like I hate the fallacious arguments used against gun rights. But I expect that from the left. With the right, like I I expect them to be more pragmatic. And you know, this is one of the things I don't completely agree with Thomas Sowell and with others when it comes to talking about gun control and stuff. Because look, it's just a I've said this on live streams 2 years ago and on videos, but like I said this in a discussion with one of my friends who owns firearms, and like I said, I'm an advocate of owning and using firearms for both self defense and sporting use. Um, Keeps the YNs away. But um, the the my problem with some of these guns rights guys are they discount the research behind it, and it's just the fact of the matter, and that this was in a psychology text, that gun control measures do reduce gun crime. It does reduce violent crime. That's just a fact. Now it gets messy than that. It does. It gets messy. They will attack different lines of research in gun control, showing how them in some research there's methodological flaws, or the statistical significance was quite small in some of these uh, research conclusions, or the meta analysis um, wasn't, or that it was a poorly done meta analysis and stuff like that. And they point out all these things, and I'm like, yes, that is true, but overall, the fact is, gun control does bring down violent crime, and what they fail to consider, and this is, and I don't know if this is through ignorance or just through willful ignorance, and it can be a combination of both. But when I say ignorance, I mean ignorance of how scientific findings work, which I think it is largely the case. But I also think there's some willful ignorance going on as well. But what they fail to grasp is this, guys. In science, in research, particularly in behavioral research, social behavioral research. Um, so unlike in physical sciences, where you can have like a single study, and that single study will can confirm a huge thing, some huge alleged phenomena, which often is the case that is a single study, because the phenomena is not something that can be studied on multiple scales at once. Like it's like if you're talking about like astronomy, or something on the microcosmic level, right? Um, so you discover something like gravitational lensing back in 1917, 1919, confirming Einstein's theory of general relativity, stuff like that. Only a single study you needed to confirm that, but behavioral research is so much more complex, and it has so many variables therein, that no single study is going to confirm or reject some scientific hypothesis or idea, right? So individual studies can be flawed in a bunch of ways. What we look for in behavioral and social research is a convergence of evidence. So yes, you can pick on any individual study and look at it for its lack of uh um meth, meth methodical rigor, um or weak statistical analyses, and all those sort of things, small sample size, small, all that sort of, all those sort of things. But when you have a bunch of different studies done by different researchers, um, that are exploring different areas of the same subject, and they all keep falling on the same conclusion, that is called a convergence of evidence. When you have a convergence of evidence all leading to the same conclusion, that strongly confirms that that conclusion is correct, because obviously in empirical science you can't prove something true, because that's not how empirical that's not how That's not how empirical science works. It's not flawless. Like if you want flawless, you have to go to the formal sciences like logic and mathematics and data science. But in empirical science, um, we work with the world as it is, and studies can either confirm or disconfirm, certain scientific claims and ideas, and they can get to a point where where it the idea becomes rejected, but there's there's no amount of confirmation that will make it absolutely true. What happens is that something becomes confirmed so highly that it just becomes insane to deny it. And that's where we have all scientific knowledge, is that they're just scientific claims that have been confirmed to such a high point that it would be insane to deny it, like gravity or the sun. Like, we can't prove it with mathematical certainty, because mathematical certainty is not something we can aspire to in an empirical investigation, but we can confirm it to such a high degree that it would be just absurd to deny. And when we have a convergence of evidence on something, such as gun control measures reduce violent crime, you have to accept that. Like, yes, you can pick out the flaws in all the different sort of studies, but if all these studies are still converging on the same conclusion, that finding is strongly confirmed. And guns rights advocates don't acknowledge that, or they're unaware of that. let me guess this Let me get to some of these. What is your name? Is Grandpa Smarf? Let me see. Let me put on my reading spectacles here. Crampo Smart says there are way too many guns in the U.S. for anything to really be effective, in my opinion. Yes, but here's a good side to that. Another, and this, I'm sure some gun right people will pick this out as well. The fact that there are so many guns in the U.S. means it is practically impossible to conquer the U.S. You, like, for someone to invade, like, people trying to invade and conquer the U.S. will face a Red Dawn scenario. If you never watched that movie, watch it. It's a classic movie. And I don't mean the reboot. Watch the original one with Patrick Swayze back in the '80s. I think it came out in what, '84, something like that. But look, one of the upsides to America having a shit ton of guns is that an invading army cannot take America. It will be very hard, because middle America, you're not going to, it would be very hard to overtake middle America. Very hard. So there is an upside to our insane amount of weapons in America, is that you would, if an invading force came here, it would instantly trigger what the Second Amendment was all about. And these, you got these folks who are preppers and just gun enthusiasts, as well as, law enforcement and military, and trained firearmed instructors and so forth and so on, that form the bulk of middle America. They are they are our, probably our last line of defense, and it would be hard as fuck for an invading force to overtake America because of them. So I was about to say God bless America, but that would sound artificial coming from someone who's an atheist. But I will say this: you can't fuck with us. You can't. Uncle Sam is armed to the teeth. So I actually find it a good thing that there's too many guns in America, because it is a it is our fail safe, and I think some people forget that or don't or unaware that the insane amount of guns in America is a fail safe against would be invaders. Carlin says criminals are will always find a way to get a gun even if they're banned. Exactly, gun, and that's the other point that gun rights folks point out is that um, gun laws only affect legal people who want to obtain guns through legal measures, through legal means rather. I'm sorry, but like I said, it is just a fact that in behavioral research that gun control measures do reduce violent crime, even though, like I said, that is also true. And this is the thing: two things can hold mutually true at the same time, which is another fact about scientific uh, about science as well, is that if if thing if any scientific fact is necessarily consistent with another scientific fact, scientific facts cannot be inconsistent with each other. So, um, and what's the other issue? Well, I'll get to that. But um, Crampo Smart says if so much drugs can be distributed illegally from the border, you better get guns. You bet you better bet that guns can be too. Yeah, except it's a little bit different. The guns aren't being brought to America. The guns are largely made here, although there are some weapons that come from other places outside of the U.S. But the bulk of our weapons are U.S. are American made weaponry. Although there are some that are made in Europe and Asia as well. The the weapons, if weapons are coming illegally through the U.S. Mexican border, those they're not made there. Like, I'm not trying to shit on the Mexicans, but they don't really make firearms like that. But you guys can fact check me if I'm wrong. Carter says the conclusion shows these ninjas acting up. Please send more troops. Tupac. Crample Smart says great point. He said I would be willing to admit yes, it would probably reduce gun violence, but does it reduce the amount of criminals who have guns and violence in general? I don't know. So this is where it gets messy, and like there's one of the problems with the behavioral research on this is that back in the late 90s, early 2000s, a Republican led Congress defunded defunded research on guns. And this is another problem I have with gun rights advocates is that you can't it okay, you can say how much the gun control research has been flawed, but if you also fail to acknowledge that a Republican led Congress defunded um, behavioral scientists from doing further research, then it becomes a little disingenuous. Like, yeah, the research is flawed when you can't when you have limited means of exploring these topics because you have little funding to do so. They pulled government funding from the NIH to because I remember this long time ago. So like I said, that was my problem with it, is like, yeah, the research is flawed, but then also you defunded the NIH and other places from being able to do research on this topic. So uh, Crampo says I agree 100%. Carson says invaders do come. Black folks go run in the house. Nah, I think the ones the one well the black folks who are strong 2A, because you have a lot of 2A people in the black community. I think they will clap their weapons just like the white folks will, and some Koreans. Those rooftop Koreans know how to clap their guns too. Shout out to the rooftop Koreans. That's probably the only time I'm ever going to give them a shout out because yeah. But no, an invading force will likely face a red dawn situation once it hits Middle America. Once they, yeah, California, pff, whatever, New York, pff, whatever, but they're gonna face a whole different problem in places like Idaho. And yeah, mind you, yes, the populations are smaller in some of these places, but if you look at Middle America in in toto, that that is that is a strong cohort of gun-toting, Bible-thumping people who will not be easily overtaken by an invading force. uh, Crampo says not all Republicans believe in the same thing. Same with Democrats. Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm. I was speaking in generality just because it's easier. Now, obviously, and I've said this before. Like, there's a whole there's a whole uh, spectrum of people in the Republican Party. They um like when I first registered to vote, when I was 18. Um, I was a Republican, but I was a liberal Republican. I think what people normally refer to that now, they don't really say. I haven't heard anyone's refer to someone as a liberal Republican in a few decades, but I think they often will call them a rhino Republican in name only. But you got those sort of folks. Conversely, on the Democratic side, you have these so-called blue dog Democrats, which are very conservative folks who do not align with anything with the Democratic National uh, Committee, as far as they're basically Republicans who just are registered as Democrats because they are the oldest Democrats. They are the folks in the South, and most of their base is still Democrats, although they are very conservative. But that's because Democrats, over 100 years ago, were completely the reverse of what they are now. They were the conservative folks. The Republicans were more of the liberal folks. That started to change under FDR, Franklin, D. Roosevelt, and then furthermore with uh, JFK and so on. But yeah, the Blue Dog Democrats are like the rhinos. Like they're like Democrats in name only. So Jay says, "Go Blue Jays." um, but yeah, like I said, we should always remember that there's a false dilemma, but absolutely that Republicans and Democrats don't believe all the same things. Like I said, you have conservative Democrats, you have liberal Republicans. Although, like I said, I don't know if you call them liberal Republicans anymore. They'll probably be just called moderate Republicans. Um, or like look at MAGA. MAGA isn't necessarily conservative. They are right winged, but they're not necessarily conservative. Some people will disagree with me on that. Now, and they might be right because you have some MAGA who are conservative and some who aren't. But that's just to say that MAGA in total aren't necessarily conservative. Some of them are. What is more accurate to say, I think, is that MAGA is right winged, but not necessarily conservative. Whereas there are some conservatives who are, you know, conservative Republicans who are anti-Trump, and so it, there's a lot of nuance. And then you have, the extreme right wing folks who are in the Republican Party, and then there's some who are outside of the party who are extremely conservative. So yeah, there's a whole range on both in both parties. Colonel says, I've seen several news stories of law-abiding citizens losing their firearms for the silliest reasons. You can lose it sometimes for rightfully defending yourself. Yeah, that's straight. That's crazy. Or, and this might be a controversial take, but I think just because someone has a criminal history does not necessarily mean they should not own firearms. Um, Even if it's a so-called violent crime, because the problem is different states will label certain crimes violent that aren't necessarily violent. What I what I would be more concerned with is, do they have psychological problems as opposed to a criminal history? Because that criminal history could be something dealing with poverty or, you know, other things. Um, plus the other, plus the background, the backgrounds don't necessarily catch everything. I I would rather someone have to undergo psychological evaluations to have a firearm than a criminal than a criminal background check, because there are a lot of nutso people who have a clean criminal history. Also, there's a lot of people with a criminal history that aren't necessarily violent. And three, you can't three that psychological evaluation is going to catch a lot of nut jobs. So, and in other countries they do that. Like I was telling one of my friends, the Philippines has a huge gun culture. They have a huge gun culture, like similar to here in America. Like you have a there's a large zeal for gun for uh for gun toting in the Philippines. However, their measures keep keep weapons out of the wrong hands because you have to do both a background check and a psychological evaluation, um, to get your license to own a weapon, and you have to undergo training with that weapon. With I think you have to undergo some sort of firearm training. So those are sensible measures. That is what you call gun control measures. Like I think some people unfairly think gun control just means states banning the possession of guns. No, it also means having in measures that reduce the wrong sort of people from owning guns. Like I said, universal background check, psychological evaluation, necessary firearm training, those sorts of things. Krampus says, "Cool talk. It's nice to be able to find common ground as being pro 2A." Yeah, man. Like I said, I'm 2A. It's just I believe the gun is like you can. The problem is people try to dig in their heels so much that they can't see that both sides have merit. Like you can be 2A and still be for gun control. And that used to be the case 30 years ago. It used to be the NRA back 30 years ago advocated for universal background checks. The NRA. But of course, some people are so the problem is a lot of people equate gun control with anti-gun, and that's just not necessarily the case. You can be you can be pro 2A and be for gun control because uh, for a person who wants to lawfully own and use their weapon, they themselves probably don't want the wrong people owning weapons as well. I mean, it just kind of makes sense, right? Um, and that's why I say like you can be pro 2A and be for gun control. Like I said, when the NRA stopped advocating for universal background checks, largely as a response to other firearm advocacy groups that were more radical than them coming up and rejecting that notion. So then they, as a response, rejected that idea as well. But that was one of their ideas, and 30 years ago was the NRA advocated for universal background checks. That's a sensible gun control measure, which would work. Crumble says, I agree, but the problem becomes who are the people who enforce the gun control? Well, the government. So you have federal government, state government, um, and recognize the fact that the government has always, the federal government and state governments have always had gun control measures, and from the very beginning, since President Washington himself. And what people fail to recognize or remember is that some of those measures for gun control back in the 1700s and 1800s were more severe than they were now. If you weren't a if you weren't a white land owning Christian male, you weren't getting a gun. If you were female, nope. If you were non-white, nope. If you didn't own land, nope. If you, if you weren't if you weren't uh, a Christian man, nope. Like these measures used to be quite severe. And Carlton says in Tennessee do not need a license to carry a firearm. Yeah, it makes sense. Here in Maryland, you need a HQL a handgun qualifications license, whatever. But if you're a veteran, you don't have to go through the training or whatever to get the HQL. Similar with the concealed carry in Maryland. Um, and before, you can only get a concealed carry if you had a business, if you were a business owner or you could demonstrate a need to have one. They struck that law down in Maryland because they found it unconstitutional. So now anyone can get a concealed carry who qualifies, to get an HQL and yada yada yada. um, but where was I? Like I was saying, you can be pro 2A and for gun control measures as well. Um, and like I said, I think psychological evaluations would catch a lot more than just a simple background check because there are a lot of mentally unstable people who've never committed crimes, which is why they want the gun so they can commit those crimes. um, and then guns right people have a point where they say guns don't kill people. Excuse me, guns don't kill people. People kill people. Well, that's true on two fronts. One, that's obviously just a truism that people kill people, but it's also statistically correct that people will find other means to unalive people even without possession of firearms, particularly in these countries where guns are almost universally banned, or they are banned, you will find a higher incidence of people being stabbed, um, in like places like the UK, Japan, Australia, these sorts of places. And so yeah, you'll have, instead of mass stabbings, you'll have mass. I mean, instead of mass shootings, you'll have mass stabbings. So that is true, but that gets all more to the point that there should be a psychological evaluation in place, because unstable people do unstable things, right? And why give an unstable person a tool to wreak havoc on others? So Krampus says, I feel like I haven't seen a good amount of evidence that gun control works. The government makes these gun-free zones, and yet whack jobs still come in and do terrible things, like in schools. Well, again, let's keep in mind that gun control measures are not all equally effective. I think we can admit that. Gun control people need to admit that as well. Not all gun control measures are equally effective. That's number one. Um, so, two, that leads to the second thing, the implementation. A poor implementation of gun control will will retard its efficiency. Um, but there are, I don't have data on me to be honest, but there's NIH data, the little that there is, because again, back in the 90s, the Republican led Congress defunded the NIH from doing research on gun control. And you can look that up as well. And I was like, that's pretty skeevy. But um, the data that's out there does show it. Like I said, there is a convergence of evidence out there showing that gun control measures do reduce violent crime through the done and through the through the use of guns. Uh, we can always point again to certain things and say, well, see, that's an example that doesn't work. See, it doesn't work there, and I that's true, but it's misleading because it gets away from this being a probabilistic statement, not a universal statement. No one's going to say that each gun control measure was effective in each of these scenarios. What we're saying is overall, it is going to reduce crime. Overall, it's going to reduce violent crime through the use of guns. But like I said, there's NIH data as well as data from other countries in the effects of how they've brought down violent crime in their respective countries when they implemented gun control measures. Because Australia used to be pretty wild back in the day. I think they went too far in the extreme though. Um, but you can look at countries with the data showing before and after they implemented their gun control measures to see how it reduced it reduced violent crime. And you can see it here in America too, in specific pockets of you know different communities or whatever. How the implementation of certain gun control measures brought down violent crime in those respective communities or whatever. He said that's what makes it hard for me to agree to giving the government more power over guns. Well, like I said, I don't, and this is why I agree with the gun rights people. I don't agree that the government should outrightly ban firearms. And luckily, we have the Second Amendment in, to do so, to keep that in place. However, um, like I said, even with the Second Amendment, in place, you gotta remember up until like the 2000s, they interpreted it completely differently. They used to interpret the Second Amendment as the right for a state-run militia to have guns in protection of either a corrupt government or an invading force. That's how it was. That's how the Second Amendment was interpreted for like 200-300 years uh, before the case came before the U.S. Uh, Supreme Court in the 2000s, and they they using an originalist interpretation of the Second Amendment, they thought that whereas yes, there is some merit to say that it was supposed to give protection to like the a potential state-run militia or whatever. But I mean, we have the National Guard for that. That's literally what they do. It also gave the vague the vagueness in how it was written also gave rights to individual citizens to own firearms as well. And I think that is a legitimate interpretation of it. Um, if you want to look at, an originalist versus a contextualist interpretation of the Second Amendment. But either way, the Second Amendment basically prevents us from having an authoritarian government, which just outrightly just takes away all of our guns. And yet you got say that the Second Amendment can always be you know removed removed or amended, but you know how hard it takes for a new amendment to take place to end another amendment. That's very hard. Like this is why we never got an equal rights amendment, because it's very hard to put in a new amendment and to change an amendment that's already there. Like it literally took wars to end some of these amendments, right? Connor says a civil war looks different without firearms. True. Oh, would look different with yeah, would look different without firearms. Yeah. um, but yeah, getting back to that, like again, gun control measures are not the same as an authoritarian government just taking away all our guns. Because again, we have the Second Amendment, and two, like I said, there were more stricter controls of guns. Let me get my tech keyboard here so I can start type giving some info. About that rebellion um, that President Washington had to end. Because I can never remember the name of it. The Whiskey Rebellion. During the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794 was a significant uprising against the federal taxation, leading President George Washington to assert federal authority by deploying troops to quell the unrest. This is one of the first exercises of this, right? Um, and again, this led to a severe re- restriction in who could have firearms. Kramer says, I'm going to go by sub. Enjoy the discussion. Thank you. I appreciate it, brother. Hope to see you again. But yeah, like I said, we're talking about from the very birth of the nation, we we had some quite severe restrictions on who could own weapons. And then, like I said, as a result of that Whiskey Rebellion, there was a suppression of people owning firearms, even with the Second Amendment in place. Um, but let me make sure I'm not talking about the wrong rebellion, because there's the Whiskey Rebellion, then there's Shays Rebellion, and I want to make sure I'm not confusing the two. I haven't taken my American History College course in a long time, fellas. But after that, I'll probably end this, since I was hoping to get more people to kind of go back and forth with me on this topic. Hopefully in a nice way though, not like back and forth like in a nasty way, but just differences of views on it. It's hard to get nowadays because people nowadays can't disagree without being disagreeable people as well. But like I said, I come from an academic background, particularly philosophy, where you could disagree vociferously with someone and be completely chummy with them at the same time. But that kind of discourse you don't see uh, so much anymore, neither online nor in real life. People think if you disagree with something, that means you like you're a bad person if you just. So it's kind of crazy. But um, let me just ask to it, because I don't want to confuse, because I don't want to confuse. I don't know if it was the Shades Rebellion or the Whiskey Rebellion. Now I want to say the wrong one. In Washington. Oh, okay. So it was the Whiskey Rebellion. So I was right the first time. I just wanted to double check because again, I'm very pedantic and I prefer my statements to be true. So yeah, it was the Whiskey Rebellion. And like I said, for all these people, people on the gun right side, you know, clutching their pearls or clutching their guns, rather, thinking, oh, they're gonna come for our guns. Just know that, like I said, the federal government in its infancy was way tougher on the American citizen on whom could own guns. Like I said, if you weren't a white Christian land owning male, forget about it. Now, did a lot of people still own guns regardless? Sure, but legally, no. uh, but yeah, having said that, I mean, I don't know what else is there to say. Um, Other than like I said, this I originally had this idea to talk about this 2 weeks ago. I forgot what was the incident that was going on at the time. I don't remember if it was another. I think it had to do with several things at the time. It was in response to the Charlie Kirk shooting. Uh, there was some other stuff going on in the news at the time. That's why I was like, I want to talk about this, since I've talked about it in a roundabout way and other previous live streams, and then a few videos with one of my homeboys. But then, like I said, finding out about how California muscled Glock to basically uh, end their whole product line, like 90% of it, which is pretty much its whole product line. I'm like, yo, that's crazy. And then they're facing several lawsuits because you got a bunch of criminals modifying these different gen series of Glocks. And I'm like, how is it their fault if they're illegally modifying them? Like, it's not like Glock is teaching them how to do it. They don't have, there's not YouTube, because I'm pretty sure the YouTube videos would be quickly demonetized and taken off YouTube. But I don't see them, and you guys can tell me if you've seen these videos, but I haven't heard of like videos showing these YNs and these other criminals out there how to illegally modify their Glocks so that they can, you know, be be turned into I forgot what you call them. But I was like, is that so? Is that is that the company's fault, or does that mean we need to like? Because that doesn't make sense. Like no, like when people started using Robitussin to make, I think it was Robitussin, right? When well, or cough syrup more generally, because I think Robitussin is just a specific. But when people were using like cough syrup to make scissor, sipping on some scissor, sip, like when they like or lean. I think lean and scissor are the same thing, right? You guys can tell me, you younger folks. But when people were using cough syrup or whatever, because I think of the ingredient in cough syrup, codeine. When people were using that to make lean, and people were getting high off of lean, some people even died using using lean. No one came after the cough syrup people and said you guys need to stop making cough syrup with codeine, or if they did, that didn't fly. Instead, they, at the stores they restricted access to who could purchase cough syrup and how much quantities of it they could buy. Shouldn't that be the similar solution? instead of saying Instead of going after the manufacturer saying you can't make you can't make these guns like this because people are going to modify them through illegal means, making them more dangerous weapons. Like, how is that the manufacturer's fault? Shouldn't that be at the middle level of who gets access to these things, to these weapons? That seems to be more sensible than telling them you gotta shut down production of all these firearms, and instead make them make a new series of Glock weapons that can't be illegally modified. That's a multi-billion. Glock is $1 billion uh, business. Like, tell them to shut down 90% of their merchandise. That's insane to me. And facing all this legal pressure and lawsuits, like, people should be worried about that. Whether you're a gun control or gun rights, the fact that the government can come after a private business, a private company, and say you got to shut down all you can't make your merchandise anymore. That's that's insane. And like I said, I'm a strong advocate of gun control because, like I said, behavioral research acknowledges the fact that gun control reduces violent crime, through the commission of guns. However, again, it's all in the implementation. But people, this is where I think Crampel Smart would definitely, if he was still here, would agree with me. Is that's insane that the government, whether state government or federal government, can come after a private company and tell them to shut down making their merchandise because other people are illegally because people are using these weapons not only illegally, but they're modifying them illegally. Like that, I don't think that's the merchandiser's fault. Like I said, that would be just as insane as telling Robitussin or any of these other companies to make cough syrup that okay, people are mixing your cough syrup with drugs to make lean, so you guys can no longer make cough syrup. You got to make something else, or you got to make cough syrup in a without the main ingredient that people use to soothe their 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 coughs and colds. What? That's the same. That's basically what California and all these other folks are doing with Glock, saying, "Yeah, you can't make your Glock Gen series guns anymore. You don't have to do something else, make something else. You can't sell these anymore." That's that is authoritarian. That's authoritarian, and I I don't uh, I don't think it's gone to the Supreme Court, but I could see this facing a U.S. Supreme Court challenge. So I guess that's all I'll say about that. Unless anyone else has something something to add to this. Omar says I have some Confederate money, dude. Why do you always, with all due respect, brother? Why do you always come into the live stream with something that has nothing to do with the topic? With all due respect, what's up, Eric? I'm actually about to shut this thing down, but you guys can watch it on replay. Hopefully, you'll find it informative, and you can add to it like any gaps of information, which I'm sure there's a lot. There's a lot. I'm sure you guys want to add. But yeah, what time is it? 11:41. Yeah, don't good timing. But yeah, I'm about to shut this puppy down. Um, but to get back to my original, to get back to what I said from the beginning, and also my conclusion, I wasn't talking about the Civil War. I was talking about the history of gun possession, and the Whiskey Rebellion is not the Civil War. I'm I cringe at the state of how U.S. history is being taught today. The Whiskey Rebellion happened in the 1794. That is not the Civil War era. The only time I mentioned Civil War was an hour ago when we were talking about a Civil War would be much different without firearms. That was the only mention of the Civil War. But in any case, getting back to what I said from the beginning, I'm gonna end it with the same uh, claim, which is you can be a 2A advocate, but also be for gun control at the same time because are not they are not mutually exclusive. And like I said, the best example of that was how the NRA 30 years ago used to advocate for universal background checks. Carlin says maybe Glock can create firearms that can only be operated by metrics using sophisticated AI technology. They can, but again, so they're going to end all their Gen series. I think the only ones that they're going to keep is I forgot the name of them. Colian Noir talks a lot about this, so you can catch that on his Instagram page or on his YouTube. I saw it on his Instagram, but I'm pretty sure he has it uploaded on his YouTube. He talks about this way more eloquently than I do, but he's an attorney and he you know is one of the members of USCCA, so he can fill in the details of this. But even if they did do that, yeah, he does have a great channel. But even if they did do institute biometrics in their guns, how would that would price out so many people? That would make you know how expensive that would be in acquiring biometrics um, using AI technology on a firearm. Glock is like one. Glock is one of those affordable weapons that like first time gun owners acquire, and then once they get a taste of what they like, then they delve into the different things, the different types of firearms by all the different companies out there. But that just on the like economically, that would just be burdensome. And like I said, that's quite authoritarian that a state can come down on a private company and tell them what they can and can't sell. So, but yeah, like I said, you can be, like I said, guns rights while also be for gun control, because usually the people who are responsible gun owners do want guns in the hands of responsible people too, and that's the whole point of gun control, so that responsible people can own guns. So, um, I'll end it there, but well, I mean, we'll see how this develops. Whether Glock is going to challenge this in Supreme Court or whether they're just going to shut down everything. We'll see. But I'm out, guys. You guys have a great rest of the Friday or your weekend. I will be back this weekend though with some more stuff. Hopefully, Mrs. Contrarian will be able to do our overdue uh, stream where we talk about some stuff, like stuff on TV, like The Boys, and if that goes well, then we'll make that a reoccurring thing where we just kind of chop it up over over movies and TV shows and stuff like that. Carlin says the firearm will also be able to detect or sense certain situations, like it can detect if you're at a school or crowded places. AI isn't that good yet. It's not that good. That that would create a lot of false positives, because how would the AI, what would be the identifying marker of someone being at a school versus a supermarket or a church or a library, an amusement park, a mall, at a in someone's home or professional building. I, I and conversely, if it can do that, won't that be feeding it a lot more information than it needs? I like assume like let's putting all it aside. Let's say the weapons could do that. That would be insanely expensive. So just from an economic perspective, I don't think that would be feasible. But like I said, the whole thing is about them illegally modifying them. And let me see. Let me actually specify what that is before I go. Um, but yeah, California banned them from the California ban forces Glock to discontinue nearly all models. That's just crazy. Like to me, like even if I wasn't a gun rights person, that to me that would just be so freaking cringe that California could force a private company to do that. And besides that, fuck California. I said it. No disrespect to the people who live there, but fuck the California government and just fuck California culture in general. Is it GPS tracking on the firearm similar to the autonomy Waymo vehicles? Yeah, but I don't know how that would stop you from firing them. Like, but that's not the issue. The modification isn't. The modification is what it's doing to the weapon, not where it's being fired. That I think that's the issue. It's more of it's not where it's being done. Is who is what's being done to it. Um, I clicked on USA Today. Now I can't even see where the article is. Uh, I hate looking at news articles online because it'll often redirect you somewhere because they make it so ad heavy. But also, it's basically the switches. So you know how all the YNs talking about I got switches, like they threatened, like when they threatened the National Guard coming to Chicago a month ago, and they threatened the president himself, saying y'all, president better not bring National Guard here because we got switches on our guns. Like, so what? You got switches. They got like so the what? They got every level of weaponry, drone technology, and intel, and so on that they can use as their resource to make to make their lives miserable. They talking about we got these switches, but yeah. So the so the law signed by governor gave Gavin Newsom. Did I say Fagin? Well, whatever. Newsom on October 10th will outlaw retail sales of semi-automatic handguns that can be easily modified using a category of tools commonly known as Glock switches, machine gun conversion devices that interfere with the gun's trigger device to allow shots to continually fire while the trigger is pressed. So, like I said, that's a technical issue. It's not about it being used in the commission of crimes in a school place and stuff. It's just the fact they shouldn't be illegally modifying these handguns to turn them into to have these machine gun fire. He said the new AI Glock 1000 wouldn't be able to be modified. Well, they're going to basically they're not going to use AI. That's I don't think that makes sense, but they are going to all if they go on with if they fulfill the ban on all their previous weapons, um, they're just going to make it so that they can't be modified with the Glock switches. So that's just a technical issue. It doesn't require AI. I think people put too much faith in AI, um, because it's just a technical issue of switching some like literally the word switch, like switching, like they're switching things out to physically, not not digitally. They're switching things out digitally to make the semi-automatic handguns shoot out like a machine gun. So, and that is problematic. But again, I don't see that being the problem of the manufacturer. I see it as a problem at I see it as a problem perhaps with the retailer on the I see that more as a problem on a retail level and on the level of whom gets possession of these weapons in the first place, similar to like the whole cough syrup dilemma back in the day with every with these dumbass niggas buying cough syrup and creating lean. Like instead of they didn't come like I said, they didn't come down on Robitussin and NyQuil and all these other companies and say you can no longer make cough syrup with thing codeine ingredients in it or whatever. Instead, the retailers just put all those things behind glass cases and restricted how many bottles of it you could buy so that people couldn't make mass quantities of lean using cough syrup. And I think you also needed to be 18 to buy it. So those are the similar measures you could do with Glock and other guns to keep people from buying them and then putting switches on them to make them shoot out like machine guns. Is that again you restrict who has access to these weapons at the retail level. So that would be my suggestion. But who am I? So anyway, um, I think I'll end it there. But thank you, Carlton, because you kept the conversation going forward. You and, and the new homie Crample Smart. And shout out to Eric as well. But I'm out, guys. Take care. See you.